presentation. And I'd like to say good morning, everyone, for joining us for today's online retreat, led this morning by Dr. Susan Timoney, a professor and dean at the Catholic University of America. Dr. Timoney will be leading our retreat on the topic of evangelizing disciples, and we look forward to hearing her teachings on the topic. Father John will be saying more about that in just a moment. Very quickly going over a few ground rules. Everyone was muted upon their entrance to the call, and we kindly ask you to please remain muted throughout the duration of the retreat, unless Dr. Timoney asks us to unmute ourselves. Secondly, please do add any questions or comments you have throughout chat or in chat, and Dr. Timoney, I'd be happy to alert you if there are any questions that people are asking. And lastly, the retreat, as I mentioned, is being recorded, and we'll make that recording available to those who would like to hear it. I'd now like to introduce our pastor, Father John, who will give an introduction of Dr. Timoney. Father John?
Right, thank you. Thank you very much. Susan M. Timoney received her doctorate in sacred theology at the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, the Angelicum, in 1997. She focused on Christian spirituality and the feminine dimension of discipleship. Following her studies, Susan served as vice president for formation, for education, for parish service, which had done great work in the Archdiocese. Many people came through the program. I think even people in our own parish are graduates from the program. Wonderful, wonderful work when it was with us. And it was housed in 5 dioceses in the United States and in the Archdiocese of Rome and Italy. Susan was appointed Assistant Secretary for Pastoral Ministry and Social Concerns for the Archdiocese of Washington in 2010, and served as Assistant Secretary and Secretary until the appointment as Associate Professor in 2018 at Catholic University. She began teaching as a lecturer in 1998 in the undergraduate theology program, and in 2016 was appointed as Adjunct Assistant Professor in the School of Sacred Theology and Religious Studies. Susan is a nationally and internationally recognized expert in the fields of evangelization and pastoral leadership, serving on numerous boards of directors, including Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Washington, the Catholic Apostolate Center, Dominican House of Studies, Washington, D.C., the Lay Center at Foyer Unitas, Rome, and the Catholic Information Center. So Susan is no stranger to us, and so welcome back again, Susan. We're looking forward to your presentation. Welcome once again.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Father John, for that very formal welcome. So the theme that weaves through all of those positions that I've had is really twofold. A great love for parish life and a real interest in the Church's mission of evangelization. And so those two things come together this morning in our conversation. So I'd like us to take a moment to begin in prayer. And as always, we begin in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Lord, as a community, we have just celebrated the Feast of Pentecost, and we continue to ask that the Holy Spirit shower his graces upon us as individuals and as a community in our world. We know that in a time of uncertainty, in a time of violence, in a time of fear, in a time of a need to recognize the importance of community, and most especially the transforming power of the love of Jesus Christ. We ask that we open ourselves up to the gift of the Holy Spirit that gives us the grace of courage, of patience, of hope, and of fortitude. And so bless this time together. May it help us continue to form our minds and hearts to be disciples of our Lord Jesus Christ. And this we ask always in the name of Jesus, and in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. So this presentation has been a long time coming. Some of you may have known that Tony asked me to do something back in the fall. And the week before we had planned to do this, I fell and broke my wrist, something I had never done in my entire life. I'd broken a bone and then had to have some surgery. So it had to be put off until March. And then there was a pandemic. something I never or any of us have experienced in our lives. And so we come to this moment when we have a chance to begin the conversation. And I feel like the grace of the Lord is in that conversation. Because really what we've been asked to do is to think about what part of the mission is the parish called to focus on. Most importantly, how is it that we share the love of Christ? How is it that we share the stories of the way in which Christ has transformed our lives that seem compelling and invite others to want to join us at the community? And so we're doing that this morning in the context of thinking particularly about our participation in a parish and the place of the parish in the larger community. So one of the things that we've had a chance to experience without any preparation, right, is a whole new way of living as a parish community, not able to come together on Sundays, not able to come together for RCIA or for Bible study or for the book group. In some cases, maybe, and for some periods, not even able to go into the church to pray. And so I'd like to ask you, using the chat function, in 2 or 3 words, what has the parish come to mean for you over these last couple of months? Either by way of what have you missed most, or what have you realized about the place of the parish in your own life and in the life of the community over these last couple of months? So if you'd just like to add a few words to the chat, we can see what everyone's thinking. And you can find the chat right there at the bottom of your screen, about the middle. So this is terrific. We see a lot of language around community. We see lifeline, warm, welcoming, a place of refuge, right? A really tough time, absolutely, right? So we see both the gift in some ways that this time has been, but also the sacrifice that we've been asked to make. And these are exactly the words. Solidarity is another good word, because when we talk about, well, what is the mission of the parish? And is the Lord calling us to amplify that mission or to make known that mission in new ways? Don't we live in a world that's looking for community, that's looking for a warm place, that's looking for a place where people feel welcomed, where they feel part of the family? And so this morning, we're going to break these ideas open a little bit, both first through the thinking of Pope Francis, and then secondly, through a vision that the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, so the bishops are asking us to consider by way of our ongoing participation in what the church calls the new evangelization. So I want to sort of start backwards rather than talking about evangelization, which in some cases is a new word for many people, or a word that they're not quite sure reflects what they understand, how they understand what it means to be a Catholic. I'm going to wait and talk about evangelization at the end, and see how we get to that word. So Melissa's going to share for us a relatively long quote by Pope Francis. And what we're going to do is just break open what he has to say here when he's talking about the mission of the parish. So he says, the parish is not an outdated institution, precisely because it possesses great flexibility. It can assume quite different contours, depending on the openness and missionary creativity of the pastor and the community. And so right here, I think it captures what we're about today, this opportunity to think more deeply about the openness and the missionary creativity of the pastor and the community working together. And whereas before, some of us might say, not sure parishes are flexible. Sometimes we do the same thing the same way for a long, long time because it's the way it's always been done. But yet, look what the last couple of months has proven, that we actually can be flexible, that we can shape the contours of the way we've been gathering as a parish in response to something going on in the world. Then he talks about, well, certainly not the only institution that evangelizes. The parish proves capable of self-renewal and constant adaptivity. It continues to be the church living in the midst of the homes of her sons and daughters. And this presumes that the church, the parish, really is in contact with the homes and the lives of its people. And so to me, that's a really important question for us to be able to ask ourselves, is how is it that we are in touch with the lives of the people who make up our community? And are we responding to their needs and their desires? And so in some ways that can be a topic that we would want to break open more deeply. Do we really understand and know what our community is experiencing and living through? And so in all of its activities, a missionary parish is a parish that encourages and trains its members to be evangelizers. It's a community of communities. It's a sanctuary, some people use that very language, where the thirsty come to drink in the midst of their journey, and a center of constant missionary outreach. And then the Pope, in the way that he can do so directly, as in the language, right, of a really good pastor. We must admit, though, that the call to review and renew our parishes has not yet sufficed in this way to bring them nearer to people, to make them an environment of living communion and participation, and to make them completely missionary oriented. So in looking at this, it's really calling attention to two dimensions of parish life. The first, that it is a community, that it's the presence of the local church, right, in a neighborhood, in an area, whose primary mission is to invite people to come to experience Jesus Christ. First and foremost in the sacraments, but also in active participation in the life as a community as a whole. And so there's this experience, right, of being brothers and sisters in the Lord. There's this experience of being the family of God in this local parish, but also part of the larger church. But the focus that we've been asked is to say, to what degree is the parish mission oriented? So for and I think that this is a challenge, particularly for Catholic parishes, because we are places that there's lots going on. And we think a lot about how do we provide religious education, and how do we provide outreach to the homebound, and how do we take communion to those who are hospitalized, and how is our social ministry serving the needs of the larger community. And those are all really good activities. They're activities that communicate what it is that we believe, and even more importantly, communicate the love of Jesus. What Pope Francis is hoping that we can begin to think about is this sense of spending some time to focus on, are we explicit in taking the opportunity to share our story of the way in which Jesus has transformed our lives? And are we not only focused on all that we need to do to keep those programs, those activities going within the parish, but in what way are we intentionally reaching out to those who may not know what the parish has to offer, who may be searching for a community and aren't sure how to find one, or even may think, I might be interested in what the Catholic Church has to offer, but I'm not sure if I can walk through the doors of the church and become a member of the community. But I also think we have almost, in a sense, a perfect moment as we begin to slowly reopen our churches to think about and to prepare for the importance of this building of relationships, the importance of learning how we reach out to people and let them know what they can experience in the community at St. Francis of Assisi. To reach out to people, to be able to say, here's a place that has changed my life. Here's a place where I can go to make sense of everything else happening in my life. And I'd love for you to have a chance to experience that. And we have a moment now where we can slowly reopen our churches. But we're also at a critical point in a lot of people's lives, because I'm guessing that some people have discovered how much they miss their Sunday morning routine, how much they miss participating in the celebration of the Mass, being able to go to confession regularly or with ease, how much they miss getting together with the prayer group. But we also know that there's people who maybe have developed a whole new Sunday routine, who maybe are asking themselves, well, did Sunday morning make a difference? Is there something different in my life for not participating in Mass at the parish than, or is there not? Am I questioning what am I missing? Do I miss anything about Sunday morning and the celebration of Mass? Have I been praying well, or have I noticed that my prayer life has dropped off too? Again, using the chat feature, I'd like to ask you to share if you have had some of these kinds of conversations, or what is your worry in terms of this next phase where we're slowly beginning to open up. But how will we recognize who's there and maybe who's not there? Right. So Melissa points out that the transition to online church isn't something that everyone could have taken advantage of, right? Either not comfortable with technology, not having the technology in their home. And so for some, there's been a complete absence of an experience of liturgy. Yes, this realization of people who may still feel it would not be safe for them to return to a large group activity or participation, and also being attentive to medically what's possible, what do we have to be attuned to. Certainly the ease of online Mass, to be sure. I had a colleague at Catholic University ask me, was it bad that her family started coming to Mass in their pajamas, not even getting dressed? And so definitely a comfortability, right? And a much more relaxed readiness to be able to go to Mass. So I like the way that some of you are thinking that we want to be able to be super attentive to those who are even struggling about whether to attend or not. We want to be attentive to the mix of opportunities we might have, both coming to liturgy, smaller prayer service periods of adoration. So the first thing, as we continue to think about this, is that this is exactly what Pope Francis is trying to help us to think about. Is when we talk about a mission-oriented parish, what we're really talking about is being intentional about building relationships, among the parish community, but also between the parish and the larger community. So even though in some ways we talk about, we tend to think about missionaries as those who bring the gospel for the first time, perhaps to places where there are not churches or people have not heard the good news, this kind of missionary activity is more connected to what it means to be a disciple of the Lord. And so this reflection comes from Pope Francis's Joy of the Gospel. And a little later on, after he concludes his reflections on the parish, he then makes this broad invitation to say, as Catholics, we need to think about ourselves not simply as disciples, but as missionary disciples, right? So that sense that we have been entrusted with a part of the mission, which is to share this experience we have of being in relationship with Jesus, of following Jesus, and in particular, following Jesus as Catholics in and through, right, the sacramental life of the church and the life of our parish. And so one of the things that Tony and I are hoping we can reflect on is, to what degree are we comfortable with thinking about ourselves as missionary disciples, and thinking about the way in which we're always looking for opportunities to amplify the mission of the parish. And because the parish is asking us to be flexible in these times, we have this perfect opportunity to ask, in what ways can the parish come closer? This last sentence, be nearer to the people, to make the parish an environment of living communion and participation, and to help parishioners be completely missionary oriented. That's a huge ask in some ways. How do we be nearer to the people? How do we really feel like there's a relationship between what's happening in people's homes and what's happening at the parish? How do we call them to a living communion? Someone in the chat talked about, right, that relationship between communion as we receive the body and blood of Christ in the Eucharist, and that it creates this communion among those who are members of the parish. Are we comfortable taking up this idea of being a missionary disciple? Well, this is something that is really challenging for a lot of Catholics. I remember one of the first times I was teaching about the church's renewed vision and call to a new evangelization. And I was talking about what we mean by evangelization and going out and sharing the good news with people. And a woman raised her hand and she said to me, "Dr. Timoney, I'm a Catholic because we don't evangelize." And I thought, okay, we have a really long way to go, because as Father John could tell you better than me, evangelization comes from the Greek word evangelium, which means good news. And it comes from the time that in Greece, there were runners, right, who were tasked after the battle was won to run to share the good news with the king that the battle was won, right? And so while we might not like the image of battle, I think that image of running to share the good news is exactly what we saw Mary Magdalene doing, right? When she recognized that the Lord had risen from the dead. It was the missionary mandate that Jesus gave his disciples as he was preparing to return to the Father, to go, to share the good news, and to baptize. And so in the language of the modern day parish, we still have this sense of, how do we go to meet people where they're at and to invite them to come to the parish, to experience the community of disciples we have there. And obviously, if not baptized, right, to consider wanting to be baptized. But so evangelization captures this sense of what it means to be missionary oriented. That is to say, what does it mean to share the good news? And I want to call your attention back up to the top of the paragraph where it says, that this is something that the pastor and the community are called to do together. And I think this is really important too, because there is a sense of co-responsibility with the laity and the clergy, that we do both in and through the work that we do at the parish. And all of you are on this call this morning, I think, because you spend a lot of time and have a tremendous passion for the mission of the parish. And it also means individually, in a sense, related to what we experience at the parish. We're called to share the good news with our friends, with our neighbors, with those that we work with on the job. And that's the part that I think is both challenging, and I think all of us would say we need, first and foremost, perhaps more courage, but definitely some ways to think about how do we do that naturally? How do we do it in a way that people perceive it as invitational? One of the associations a lot of people make with evangelization is evangelical. And our evangelical brothers and sisters, right, who have this great passion for sharing the good news, but not always in a way that people would experience as invitational or as welcoming. And so for the American ear particularly, we sometimes, when we hear evangelization, we think of sort of worst case examples that we may have seen. And yet what it really is it can't dismiss us from the responsibility that we have, because we're disciples of the Lord, and this is exactly what the Lord asked his disciples to do. So following on Pope Francis's call for our parishes to really enter into a period of renewal, the U.S. bishops, in a document called Living as Missionary Disciples, decided to break down this understanding of what it means to be not only a missionary parish, but what it means to be missionary in terms of our own sense of discipleship, into what they call 4 movements or 4 areas of concentration. And they use the language of encounter, accompany, community, and send. And I think that this is really marvelous for getting at exactly what all of you put in the chat, which was what makes your love for parish life so important to you and so life-changing. So the first thing that we're asked to remember is our parishes exist, the church exists for one and only one reason, and that is to invite people to encounter Jesus Christ. Pope Benedict had a great way of saying this. He said, more than an institution, more than a set of dogmas or a set of beliefs, that faith is first and foremost a relationship with Jesus Christ. And the parish is first and foremost the place that we invite people to encounter Jesus. And even starting here, I would say this is an important conversation for us to be able to have with people, that in this time that they've been out of the routine of going to Mass, has it helped them to think more deeply about what it means to have a relationship with Christ? Is it a relationship the way we think about relationships? Someone with whom we talk with regularly, someone who we love, someone who we have a sense of both being responsible to and receiving gifts from. And so the reminder that when we're asking people to consider what the church has to offer, what we're asking them is to consider a relationship with Jesus Christ. So at Catholic University, we have a course that all students are required to take called The Church and the Human Person. And one of the things that I say on the first day of class is that if they've come to class thinking they have no interest in learning about the church, or even perhaps learning about who Jesus is, that I would ask them to just give some attention to thinking about what we're going to learn in a way that says, is this person Jesus someone I would want to know more about? And because we are a church that is blessed with a rich sense of doctrine, with a very clear understanding of truth, with a wealth, right, of books and writings and teachings about the faith, we can sometimes forget that what we want to highlight most is this relational dimension. I am a parishioner at St. Peter's on Capitol Hill, and we tried a number of years ago, and I work in the RCA program, and we tried a number of years ago to really focus on always presenting the teachings in terms of what it teaches us about being in relationship with Jesus Christ. And we were really proud of the work that we had done. And so after the folks came into the church and we were in the period of mystagogy, we said to them, share with us what you learned in this process. Share with us what you've come to understand more deeply. And the first person to speak said, well, you know, I was blessed because I grew up in a relationship with Jesus. So I can't say that I learned more about Jesus, but I learned a heck of a lot about the Catholic Church. And it was such a wake-up call that what we realized is even a lot of the language we use, for people who don't know the language well, they don't necessarily see the person of Jesus in the way that we talk about what it means to receive communion, or why participating in the sacraments is so important. And so we're comfortable with a language, but sometimes even the language itself can still sound more like the organization or the institution. And so this idea of how do we really help people to know that it's this relationship with Jesus that transforms everything, that's at the heart of everything about parish life. The second piece is the piece where we're really going to be called to in the next couple of months. And this is one of the innovations, in a sense, that Pope Francis has brought to the way that we talk about evangelization. He said we have to be ready to meet people where they're at. We saw that in how he understands the role of the parish, present in the homes of its people, but to walk with them and to help them in their own pace and at their own time experience Christ. And so this idea of accompaniment really is absolutely rooted in that story of the road to Emmaus, right? Where Jesus, the apostles were leaving, moving in the opposite direction of Jerusalem. They were completely downcast because they felt, right, that it had been a failed mission on the part of Jesus. They had no idea what was going to come next. They were confused, they were scared. And Jesus met them, and the first thing he said was, tell me how you're feeling. Tell me how you understand all the events of the last couple of days. And he let them talk, and he let them share their feelings and their thoughts. And then he began to work with what they had shared with him to help them to see the truth, to help them to recognize in him, in the breaking of the bread, that actually what they thought had been a failure was not. And so this idea of accompaniment is to say, we walk with people, we want to give them the time to experience Jesus in their own way, in the sense on their own time, seeing them to full experiences. So it's not reduced to this idea, well, I'm okay and you're okay, and if that's where you're at, that's good. It's to say where you're at is the perfect starting place where Jesus wants to encounter you and wants to invite you to a deeper understanding of him, of his love, of the church, and of the life of the church. So this takes patience, right? But this takes us thinking about, and here's where I think, again, we have a golden opportunity, maybe not thinking so much about the goals of our programs, the kinds of programs that will help people come to learn the faith better, but making sure that within those programs, there's time for people to build relationships. There's time for people to be able to enter into the experience of the church and Jesus and prayer and the sacraments, but not on a defined timeline where you sort of feel like it's now or never, right? So we know sometimes people go through the RCIA process and say, I'm not ready. And that's fine. That's actually oftentimes a really good sign. It also says that maybe we need to think about ways we can meet young couples before they come for marriage preparation, to begin to think about the sacrament of marriage, to begin to understand what it means to enter into a sacrament, a sacramental life. Maybe it means saying to everybody and anybody in the community who would like to come to the book club, you don't need to be a member of the parish to join this book club. Before we got started this morning, folks were sharing that there's going to be a book club on the discussion of racism. I can't think of a better opportunity to let people know beyond the parish membership that this is happening and they might want to come. And then to be prepared, if you have this really diverse group, to have the kind of conversations that help people get on the same page or give people more time to break open concepts. So this accompaniment is really attending to the relational dimension when we're thinking about programming and the kind of programming we're doing. Another simple example would be it's thinking about when we're providing food at the pantry, is there an opportunity to invite people also to come to Mass? Or is there an opportunity to pray for people if it seems like the right thing to do in the moment? When we visit people in their homes through St. Vincent de Paul, do we have a chance to talk in some way about the love of Christ that's natural, that's appropriate to the situation? So always being able to help people connect Christ to what it is that we're doing. The third one I think is really easy for people, this idea of community, right? That the great gift of the parish is to experience what it means to be a community, what it means to know your neighbors, to have people who you pray with and who are praying for you. I think in this time, right, to know that people are there who can help you when you need help. To me, I would hope that people living through this pandemic have recognized that having a community is so important. And that for people who may not know the church well, to know that one of the great gifts of the church is a community who can be there when you most need them, who can be the people who you can pray with, who you can talk with, who you can be assured of their support of you. And so what have we learned about what people are looking for in community and how we can better be a community for the people who worship with us? Then finally, sort of at the heart of the matter, is if you've received Christ, you need to be able to share Christ, right? And so this idea that the way in which we most help our pastor is being the people who do the work of evangelization in those places where Father Dylan isn't most readily, right? So at the kitchen table in the morning when our teenage kids start complaining about having to go to Mass, how do we talk to them about the place that Mass has in the life of our family and in your own life? What do we have to offer people on the job who are asking some big questions, right? Who are, when they're facing the sickness of loved ones, when they're not sure where to turn, when they don't know how to think about a world that seems to be becoming increasingly polarized or violent. What do we have to offer because of knowing Jesus and because of having this sense, right, of hope and of faith? What does that mean in practical ways? So this idea that we see a responsibility, right, to be able to assist the church in her mission of evangelization by recognizing that we're the frontline evangelizers in our homes and in our workplaces and out in the larger community. And so how do we help form parishioners, give them the confidence and the courage to be able to do that? And I think, again, we've got an opportunity over the next couple of months. So I was out walking the other day, ran into a parishioner with whom I served on the Pastoral Council, and I hadn't seen her in more than a year. She had had a baby in the meantime, and so I got a chance to see the baby. But our conversation naturally turned to, hey, how do you feel about going back to Mass? And she was talking about the fact that she has aging parents and she has this newborn, and they've been pretty socially distant for the last couple of months, and that she wasn't sure that she was ready, right, to go back to Sunday Mass. And so we talked about what's the parish doing to make it as healthy a place, right, as possible. What makes sense for her, and she was hoping, obviously, that there would still be online streaming of services. But we have this opportunity to ask people in a gentle way, hey, have you been back to Mass? Hey, how's it been going? To be able to start sharing, right, what this experience has meant for us. And also maybe for people who find that the fear is really sinking in deeply about is the virus going to return? Are more of my family members going to get sick? Am I going to be in a situation where I can't visit those who are sick in the hospital? Those are some pretty serious questions. And so how do we have the opportunity, again, to weave in the sense of hope that we might have, or even to acknowledge our fear, but to say prayer helps, right? So I feel like there is this, there are going to be a lot of conversations we might find ourselves having to give us the opportunity to practice evangelization. I'm going to take a moment now just to pause. There's lots of good comments in the chat, but if anyone has a question or a comment that they'd like to make, now might be the time.
Dr. Timoney, just to
Yes.
clarify, is this an appropriate time for folks to unmute themselves and ask questions if they
I
would
think
like?
we could do that as well, yes, because it's a manageable size group, I think.
Okay, thank you. Everyone, please feel free to offer any other comments or questions either through chat or by raising your hand, and we'll.
Here's a really good question or comment to break open and to think about, right? Have we lived too long in a culture where it's extremely hard to give time to one another? And I'm reading a lot, needless to say, about education these days and education, online education. But one of the things is the number of parents who are saying they find their kids are happier and less stressed. And so what does that mean about the busyness that we've allowed ourselves to practice? And is that really healthy? So that certainly is an example where I think people are asking some of those bigger questions.
Dr. Timoney, one thing that I've been noting to a lot of my friends in and outside of the church is that life right now seems kind of like where I grew up in the South. Everything's a little slower. No one's in a big rush. We're taking time to visit with one another in the ways that we can do that. And I do feel after this time is over and we are returning to some degree of normalcy, how to maintain that, because I think that has been the very special silver lining of this time, and that life has forced us to slow down, and it's given us the time and space to grow closer to Christ if we've opened our heart and our lives to do that.
Yes, I think that's right. A number of our neighbors who have been gathering on Friday evenings at 5 o'clock to share something to drink and to talk across fences. It's like, why can't we do this all the time on nice summer nights, right? Like just that small commitment to say that we're going to come out and just chat as neighbors do is, yeah, it gives us great opportunity. Or building into, right, some of our programs at church, just time for people to sit and talk. And not feel like we're wasting people's time or we have to get right to the agenda, but to see that as equally important.
If I can piggyback on that, that's exactly the kind of thing, I think when we're offering the Mass opportunity online, It's the beginning, in terms of parish outreach. How do we utilize, not that we use the Mass, but how do we use that as a springboard, right, to support folks, just the kinds of conversations you've been describing, but also create, as a parish, opportunities that connect that conversation back to parish life. Like, as you said, I've sometimes, when I've met in other forums on the online meeting platform, what we miss is the conversations that happen before the meeting begins and the lingering after the meeting.
Yes.
So do we is one strategy when we're meeting online with people to build that into our time, to be intentional, to say we're gathering, let's, just as we would if we were in person, have some informal chat. It's going to stay open. Or when we finish, we're going to leave this on for a while. Talk amongst yourselves, because those parking lot conversations are essential, and where the community experience happens. And so, both about how do we do it when we're gathering for parish business, but also how do we create additional opportunities.
Yeah, Nikki Gumbel, who is an Anglican pastor who founded the Alpha program. So the Alpha program is a faith-sharing program that was designed to be done around the meal, either in someone's home or in the parish hall. And he was it's been around for 20-some years now. He was always adamantly opposed to taking it online. But because of the pandemic, he agreed to allow it to be facilitated online, and he and his wife chose to be facilitators. He really wanted to test this out. And he said he was so surprised that people shared more deeply, more quickly. And he felt like it was because they were in the comfort of their own home. And so they were in an environment in which they feel very comfortable, and then enabled them to share a little bit more freely. And he thought in this case, maybe the distance of not sitting beside someone, but having the screen in a sense. And so he feels like that both as a pastor in terms of the way that he thinks about Mass, but in the way that we think about evangelization, will we have a both end, right? Are there opportunities where people may find online is the perfect invitation, but to allow for that sharing, but always with the intention, here would be the accompaniment piece, right? With wanting never to say that it's the same as being together at the liturgy, or it's the same as being in the same room, right? Praying together. But is there a way that we can build on some advantages for some people in the online environment? It's a question we definitely, I think, need to ask ourselves. And I hope that people have so appreciated the time for conversation and a little slower pace that that they want to hold on to it. And maybe it's our job, right, as leaders, to build it in and to remind people of what we learned when we had that opportunity as the pressures get stronger, to go back to the kind of schedules that we may have been used to. So it's an intentionality there that we need to think about. Tony.
One thing that I've seen through St. Vincent de Paul is now we're being asked to be friends with the people that we help. And, I think in the past, the society had become like a group of social workers or whatever. We definitely weren't friends. But, as we've been challenged to return to the ideals of the founders of the society, friendship is one of those things. And so, I've tried to do that with people and found that it's not that hard to kind of just share. And I'll use an example. I try to go to sport and health, and that's where I meet most people outside the community. And this one young Hispanic man who was 30 said to me, "Sir, how old are you?" So I thought, boy, I said to him, if I told you, you'd be shocked. So, but it illustrated to me that being present with people and smiling and answering little questions here and there brings up the ability to talk about bigger things. And so later on, when I got into RCIA, one of my neighbors, who's kind of the curmudgeon of the neighborhood, and it's a real challenge to many people. I saw him on the street, so I said, "Hey, Bob, we're doing a program at the church, and maybe you'd like to consider coming. You know, it's to really revitalize our faith." And I knew he was an inactive Catholic, and he stood and listened. We talked a little bit. Then at the end, he said, "What are you, some kind of priest or something?" So, but the thing is, the point that I want to make is, I've really found that the more I do it, the easier it becomes, and the fears that I have kind of go away. Now, I know when I witnessed an altercation in 7-Eleven yesterday, I wouldn't have got into that. There's prudence here. But, you know, a priest I've known for many years has said for a long time, it's fun to be Catholic. And I found that to be the case. It's really fun to be Catholic. It's enlivened my life. Kind of reminds me of growing up in the small town that I grew up in, north central Pennsylvania, that if you were rude to people or isolated yourself, your life was going to be miserable. And you had to engage with people at some level to have a more a life that was worth living. So, you know, I've seen that also with evangelizing discipleship, is that it is something that enlivens my life, it brings me joy. And actually, you know, I've found that the fears or reservations that I have pass away as the more that I become involved with people and do this. In fact, you know, as I've said a number of times, RCIA has been one of the greatest blessings I've experienced in years, because engaging with people, trying to figure out how do you share faith in a way that they can understand has really been fun to me. So, you know, I see this as really an opportunity that Christ gives us, that the Lord gives us, to experience his joy and his presence. So
that's the perfect lead in, Tony, because we hope that this isn't the first and last conversation. I have a little homework for you to do over the summer before we gather again in the fall. And so if you could enlarge the screen there, I'm going to give you some background. Oh, I'm sorry, that was me that needs to. Okay, there we go. So, two things. One, the Catholic Apostolate Center, which is based here in Hyattsville, Maryland, it's predominantly a digital media ministry. They have been asked by the Bishops' Conference to develop materials for the parishes to break open this idea of encounter, accompany, community, and send. And they have a series of really great short videos and reflections on each of these areas of the document that you may find really helpful to your own thinking. Well done. It's bishops and lay people talking together, and those involved in ministry and those involved as parish leaders. So if you wanted to do a little bit more thinking and reflecting, that's a great place to go. And to get familiar with the language, because I think the language is helpful when we think about our ongoing program. But then I'd like you to practice evangelization in two ways. One, as I said earlier, I think there's going to be lots of conversations over the next couple of months with family members and friends about whether they return to church. Are they going to return to church? Are they still live streaming those masses that are available if they don't feel like it's the right time for them to return to Mass? But also to pay attention, right, to the people we're not seeing. I think, again, one of the common complaints you hear from Catholics who have drifted away from the parish is they'll say, no one reached out to me. No one seemed to know that I was missing. And so here is an opportunity for us to really take a look around, right? To ask one another, those of us who are involved in ministries, have we seen the Smith family? Have we seen Tony and his wife? If we haven't, is this the right time just to check in and see how they're doing? See if they, if they've been keeping up with the communications. Do they know there's an online book club? Do they know there's a Bible study? But how can we be intentional about paying attention to the folks who may not return, or who may be really trying to figure out if it made a difference that they were going to Mass, that they were active in some group in the parish. So as leaders, right, to strategize a little bit, would it be as formal as calling people after 4 or 5 months? To me, I think the informal might be more fruitful, and it would engage more people, right? But just to stay on top of who's not there, and do we know why they're not there, and how might we be able to reach out? So those are some bits of homework before we gather again to kind of take a deeper dive into what more needs to be done for this sense of missionary renewal in the parish. And I think I probably want to end by saying it's not that our parishes aren't lively places with lots of opportunities for people and to encounter the Lord. That's definitely there. We're blessed by that. But what Pope Francis is really getting at is being more intentional about the relational piece and building relationships where we feel like we're disciples together, right? Where we feel like we are brothers and sisters in the Lord. And I think we can always increase that dimension of parish life. So, so I think that is where we're going to end today. I have a prayer that I want to end with. It's a prayer for evangelizers, and I think it really captures some of what we talked about. Gracious Father, pour forth your Holy Spirit to inspire me with these words of Holy Scripture. Stir in my soul the desire to renew my faith and deepen my relationship with your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, so that I might truly believe in and live the good news. Open my heart to hear the gospel and grant me the confidence to proclaim the good news to others. Pour out your Spirit so that I might be strengthened to go forth and witness to the gospel in my everyday life through my words and actions. In moments of hesitation, remind me, if not me, then who will proclaim the gospel? If not now, then when will the gospel be proclaimed? If not the truth of the gospel, then what shall I proclaim? God our Father, I pray that through the Holy Spirit I might hear the call of the new evangelization, to deepen my faith, to grow in confidence to proclaim the gospel, and to boldly witness to the saving grace of your Son, Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever.
Amen.
Amen.
Dr. Timoney, thank you so much for your wonderful teachings and the wonderful questions that you posed to us as ministry coordinators and leaders at St. Francis. Before I ask Father John to please close us up this morning, I wanted to ask Trish Olin, did you have a comment or a question that you wanted to ask Dr. Timoney?
Well, actually, did I just sort of wanted to follow on her thoughts and Susan Anderson's thoughts about how to bring people together for more informal kinds of opportunities. And I'm particularly concerned about the people in our parish who have not been a part of more than maybe just the Mass, have not been a part of some of the meetings that have been held by various ministries or book groups or, you know, RCIA, those kinds of opportunities, religious ed. I think there are a lot of people out there whose connection has been very limited. And I was just wondering if there's a possibility of trying something like a coffee hour where we might identify some of those people and invite them to join together for a Zoom meeting or, you know, by phone, and just a half-hour check-in. How we've been thinking about you. We just want to get together for a short period of time so it's not too intimidating to people, but also provides an invitation where we could just say a prayer together, say hello together, and see what happens with it. I mean, you know, there are many, many people we could probably set up for those kinds of meetings and just see what happens. Maybe people will say, hey, I like this. let's do this again. I'd like to have another coffee hour or something. Sorry, a thought that I had that I wondered if we could consider something like that. Thank you. Thanks, Melissa.
I was so proud of our theology undergraduate majors at Catholic. They so missed praying together that they decided to do a Zoom call on Sunday nights at 11 p.m. to pray the rosary together. And they did it all through spring semester. And I just thought that was terrific. Yeah. Right.
Trish, thank you so much for that comment. Father John, may I invite you to make any closing remarks?
Okay. Certainly. Well, I think this has been a very, very fruitful conversation. I'm just taking it to things that I have to follow up, I think, as well as a pastor. The conversation has been very stimulating for me, and I've got some homework to do as well, which is a good thing. We're never too old for homework.
So true.
So I want to thank everyone who's joined us today, and we'll just continue doing this. And I think Trish's idea, particularly at the end, has got great merit, because there was a conversation I had with someone recently, missed a group that she was involved in, and feeling quite lonely and isolated. So I think there really is something that's quite a good idea.
And I would just say one thing as well. We do plan and hope, it depends of course on how things open up in the coming months, but we hope to be able to get together again. Usually it's in October for a follow-up retreat where we can meet together. You know, that would be the hope. And we've already invited Dr. Timoney to join us to lead that retreat, so she can follow up on what she's presented here. And that would require us also to follow up. So in the coming weeks, we will send out flock note reminders to everyone in the group. And also, you know, people who attended today could encourage others that you know who weren't able to attend to look at the questions and links that Susan has given us, and to be able to follow up, so that when we come together in October, we can really kind of hit the ground running, so to speak. And you know, I think a challenge for us is that we hear a wonderful presentation like Susan gave us today, and really enjoy it and really benefit from it. But to benefit more fully, it means we need to continue working with it. So that would be one of the challenges that we face in these coming months, to follow up personally and even in small groups with people to work with this material. And in fact, that's kind of like Trish was asking, you know, can we have organic groups that would discuss this material, and so that when we come together again in October, we can really have a deeper conversation. So, and I would again just like to thank Susan. It was a wonderful presentation and a wonderful way to spend this June morning.
Tony, thank you so much. No, it was my delight. Absolutely. And Melissa, thank you for the technical assistance. That was great.
You're very welcome. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining. And in light of our desire to more intentionally gather, I'll leave the Zoom call on for a few minutes. So if everyone would like to visit, please do stay on. Dr. Timoney, thank you so much for your wonderful, wonderful retreat. It was very thought-provoking and wonderful words to hear.
Thank you. Thank you. Absolutely my pleasure. So take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a
See you
wonderful
in the
day, Dr.
fall.
Timoney. Yes.
Thank you.
That was a wonderful conversation, Father.
It was. So thank you, Tony, for the work just putting it together.
Oh, you're welcome. And I see Dan Cardile's dog is spellbound.
Bear enjoyed it very much.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Always.
I am. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm out. I don't sit still very well, so I'm actually out. I'm actually out walking here now. I've been walking and listening. It's been great. It's been wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
I try to keep it off. the video off when I walk around because it makes everyone dizzy. I've actually been chastised for work because I walk a lot on these Zoom calls, and I've been told you have to sit still or you have to put it on the still because you make us dizzy if we're moving around.